Thank you so much for indulging us with the time, and I'm so grateful to the Cross Cultural Center, and I'm praying that they won't put us out, because I know there's other events that other groups have after. This panel is called Vernacular Culture and Aesthetics, Music, Poetry, and Theater. Music, Poetry, and Theater. I'm going to be introducing Dr. Lakeyta Bonnette, who's an associate professor of political science at Georgia State University. Dr. Deanna Reese, associate professor and program coordinator of Africana Studies at California State University, Fresno. Whoop, whoop, Fresno. Dr. Malaika Mutere, who is a faculty member of the African American Studies Department at the University of California, Irvine. And Dr. Lisa Anderson, who's an associate professor of women and gender studies, the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. Thank you all for being here, and let's join them. Join me in welcoming them. Yes, yes.
All right, good afternoon. I'm going to be really brief because I know we've kind of gone over our time limit, and I want to make sure that we hear one song in particular that kind of looks at some of the things that I discussed. I wrote a book that deals with hip hop, and in that, one chapter is dedicated to looking at black feminism, black feminist attitudes within hip hop. So if you go to the next slide, briefly talk about some black feminism attitudes and ideas. Okay. And then going to the next slide, we talk about this movement towards hip-hop feminism, which is a little different than the idea of black feminism, as Joan Morgan identifies it as a feminism brave enough to fuck with the grays, right? And so this idea of looking at hip-hop through a different lens. And there are various ways that I discuss hip-hop and feminism within the book. So I look at and break down issues. So when we're talking about before reproductive rights, it's one of the areas I look at, and how feminism is talking about how artists are talking about reproductive rights in their songs. So I talk about people like Diggable Planets, who has the song La Femme Fatale. I talk about other artists. There's a number of other artists out there who deal with some of those issues. If you go to, let's see, 1, 2, 3 more, 2 more slides. Right there. All right, and so I talk about some other social issues as well that are discussed, and then some political issues that are discussed within rap music by various artists, both male and female artists, and how these artists are utilizing, as you saw before. Also talks about the observance and the embracement of the black body. And so I talk about people like Lil' Kim, we've talked about as far as feminism, but also Nicki Minaj. And one of the images I had before was it was called a booty protector that was given to her by George Lopez on his late night show, because Regis, when she went on his show, just grabbed her booty to say, I wanted to touch it to see if it's real. And so the idea, without any type of, without even asking, right? Without any type of indication from her that that was okay. And so George Lopez decided to make a joke out of it, and she wore the booty protector, but the idea is that the black female's body is not even respected enough to say, to even ask about this, but to say, I wanted to see if it's authentic. So that was one of the images that was on the other side of ways that we've seen issues discussed within rap music and among rap female artists. And if you go to the next slide, I have Nicki Minaj, a quote from Nicki Minaj there. Oh no, that was a slide before, sorry. Okay, that's fine. Well, I have a quote from Nicki Minaj where she's basically saying, I'm fighting for the girls that never thought that they could win, because before they could begin, you told them it was the end, but I'm here to reverse the curse that they live in. And as you see here, some of the other artists that I discuss in the book is issues dealing with domestic violence. So for instance, Eve, Love is Blind. And then the song that I want to focus on is the next slide, and it's called Cleaning Out My Closet by Angel Hayes. And I will admit it is a little graphic, right? But I want to talk about the use of women and taking control over their story within hip hop and telling that story within hip hop. So we're going to listen to the song, and I'm going to display the lyrics so you can read along. And again, I'm gonna tell you it's a little graphic, but just it's the idea of a woman telling her story. Could you display the lyrics? So, yeah, play the song and then go back to the lyrics. Thanks.
Might be a little personal or a lot actually. Starts with a scratching in the car. Yeah, look. When I was 10, shit, I believed I could fly. I would just flap my fucking arms and try to beat with the sky. And in my mind, I envisioned that I was speaking with God. And then I chopped his fucking fist off and beat him with mine. But this is just a fucking portion of the war with my mind. So I'ma take you fuckers back and through the vortex of time. When I was 7, envision me at the bottom of stairs. And I solemnly swear that this is the truth, no fallacy here. See, I was young,
Oh, move it down.
I was just a toddler kid. And he wasn't the first to successfully try what he did. He took me to the basement and after the lights had been cut, he whipped it out inside of mine and forced his cock through my gut. See, it was weird because I felt like I was losing my mind. And then it happened like millions of times. And I was swear that I would tell, but they would think I was mine. And now the power that he held was like a beacon of mine. So now I got used to it. I put up with the shit. And now my hate was so organically erupted and shit. But this is nothing, cause I guess he told his friend what he do. And they ate it up. Shit, I was like a puppet for two. And then it happened in a home where every fucking one knew. And they ain't do shit but fucking blame it on you. I'm sorry, mom, but I really used to blame it on you. But even you, by then, wouldn't know what to do. And now it happens so often that he was getting particular. And I'm more scared every time we're to my speed and ventricular. One night he came home and I was asleep in my bed. He climbed on top of me and forced himself between my legs. He told me,
hey, breakfast, see you like them popsicle sticks. So put your mouth on my dick and suck and swallow the spit.
and I was confused, but I was scared, so I did what he said. I had no idea the effect it would have on my head. My heart was pumping, it was thumping with like tons of my fear. Imagine being 17 and combing your underwear. I know it's nasty, but sometimes I even bleed from my butt. Disgusting right now, let that feeling ring through your guts. I thought of offing myself, I thought of killing these niggas. Wanted to take a fucking brick and push their teeth through their lip, but wanted to smash the fucking world and burn its leftover parts. Wanted to rip it out and just fucking step on my heart. Then I grew up and I wasn't within the reach of these men, but that didn't keep me out the motherfucking reach of my sin. And psychologically, I was just as fucked as they come. I was confused, I had to prove I wasn't fucked from the jump. I was afraid of myself, I had no love for myself. I tried to kill, I tried to hide, I tried to run from myself. There was a point in my life where I didn't like who I was, so I create the other people I would try to become. Sexuality came into play, and with as scarred as I was extremely scared of men. So I stopped liking girls, I started starving myself, fucked up my bodily health. I didn't wanna be attracted to nobody else. I didn't want to be the pill, I wanted to stop my own growth. But there's a fucking reason behind every scar that I show. I never got to be a kid, so that's as far as I broke. My mental state is out of date, and that's as far as I know. My latest problem was fear, and what being fearful could do. It made me run, it made me hide, it made me scared of the truth. I'm not deranged anymore, I'm not the same anymore. I mean, I'm sane, but I'm insane, but not the same as before. I had to deal with my shit, I had to look at my truth. To understand that to grow, you gotta look at your roots. I had to cut off the dead, I had to make myself proud. And now I'm just standing, living, breathing proof. Look at me now, I made it prove everything. I made you look like a clown. I'm fucking great, can't fucking hate you, nigga. Look at me now, and I'm just saying this to tell you there's a way from the ground. The millions of a legend are often hidden in trials. So just be strong and just move on and just accept what you can, because it makes the story better when you read it to the end. Yeah,
Okay, you can stop.
that's the story behind every.
Okay, so again, this song was very graphic. But one of the things that I look at in my research is how marginalized communities and marginalized people utilize music to assert their voice and to tell their story. And I chose this song because it tells a story from beginning to end, as well as her transformation and the things that she experienced through that story. And we see this through a lot of artists who are taking control and telling their story. So I use Angel Hayes as one, but there are other artists such as Jane Gray, who talks about her abortion, her experience with her abortion, and her the experiences she went through and the thoughts that she had when she was trying to make that choice. And so we're seeing that even for women within hip hop, some of the issues are being discussed for women, by women, as well as by men, it's male hip hop artists. And so we're seeing that there's a voice and assertion of political attitudes and assertion of power within hip hop for marginalized communities. And that's basically what I look at in my research. And how do I think it interacts with hip hop feminism or feminist politics? I definitely think it's giving a voice to a place where we don't normally look. And I started off with a quote from Angela Davis, where she says that music has long permeated the daily life of African Americans. It has played a central role in the normal socialization process, and during moments characterized by intense movements for social change, it's helped to shape the necessary political consciousness. And we know that music is pervasive in our community, and that it has an influence and an impact, and we've seen music be utilized in a way that it has a powerful political impact and objective. Okay? So if there are any more questions and you want to ask anything else about the research, I won't take up too much time, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize what I do.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deanna Reese, and I have a joint appointment in history and Africana studies at Fresno State. And thank you. And you know, I didn't know exactly what to expect, although I did prepare some comments. I have to say it's not often that you go to conferences and you're asked to reflect upon and really talk about yourself. And so in some ways, you know, I had to kind of rethink what exactly, you know, I would say about myself, and also the way in which having to talk about yourself and having to reveal parts of who you are. You know, it's one thing to do that, you know, in your scholarship, but just also to be able to talk about a little bit about yourself. So I'll try to make this as quick as possible. I am the youngest in a family of 3 children, a very close-knit family. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. My mother was an immigrant. I'm very blessed and lucky to have my one living sister here with me this afternoon, who is with me, Dana Reese. So I thank you, sister, for coming. And like so many of you, I want to thank Dr. Willoughby Herard. I want to thank all the conference organizers. I want to thank you all of you that are here. I want to thank all of the students, graduate students, undergraduate students. And I just want to tell you just how privileged and how, again, what an honor it is to be in the room with so many dynamic, so many vibrant, so many illustrious women, and also just, again, the sense that I've gotten since I've been here. You know, we've talked about many things over the course of the last 2 days, and I've just been struck by all of the things that I've been hearing, again, surrounded by the kind of positive energy and spirit. I'm always struck by the power and the love and the compassion of Black women. And I am sorry, I get a little teary-eyed, only in the sense that, you know, when I think about what has brought me to this place. So I just kind of want to, because I am a historian, I just kind of also want to, you know, think about some other, you know, similar kinds of spaces that we've been, thank you, as sister scholars here in the Academy. And so this conference in this space reminds me of earlier conferences, and I didn't get a chance to go to this one, but I did want to just kind of start here. This conference reminds me of the one of the first conferences on Black women in the Academy, Defending Our Name, 1894 to 1994, that was held at MIT in Boston. I didn't get a chance to go to that one, but I did attend Black Women Academics in the Ivory Tower, Research and Praxis. And the main purpose behind both of these conferences, and so again, to all of you that are here, I think we are doing something very similar and creating a forum for Black women in academia to share their experiences and their work and to network with others. And so I just want to say to all of you, because I've heard so many just amazing, and I don't use that word lightly because I think that's an overused word in our culture, but I truly want to say the amazing work that all of you are doing. And again, what it tells me is that we need to continue to have these conversations. And so with that, I also just wanted to talk very briefly about some of my sheroes and some of the women that have inspired me, because, you know, I can say that I came to the Academy with maybe perhaps in some ways a different experience than some of you, and the fact that I study African American women. And it was from studying African American women that really gave me a home and a place. It made me feel wanted. It made me feel respected. It made me feel validated, even when others attempted to dismiss, to trivialize, and to treat what I did, what I said, and who I was lightly. So I just want to say, you know, thank you to all of you in here, especially some of the historians that have spoken here already. And again, I was encouraged to, you know, think about, you know, some of the historians that have inspired me, including my mentor, Delia Crutchfield Gillis, Darlene Clark Hine, just in terms of thinking about, you know, the work that has been mentioned by others here over the conference, Paula Giddings, thinking about Brenda Stevenson, thinking about more recent scholars like Tiffany Gill and Sharice Jones Branch. And so I say this to say as well is I wanted to talk about a little bit about the work that I do. I'm a coordinator of a program, and I know that may not seem very special or very extraordinary, but it just made me think about, you know, my place in the Academy. And I'm going to try to wrap this up because I did want to share with you a little bit about my scholarship as well. But as a program coordinator, what do I do? Okay, I bring, you know, I coordinate a program. I bring acclaimed speakers to campus. I was responsible for helping to bring Professor Abdullah to campus, to Fresno State a few weeks ago. I also help students get the kind of advising that they need in order to think about the infinite possibilities of what do you do with a degree in Africana Studies. I'm here to help them sort out the details, big and small, and helping them to earn their degrees and to helping them to make that transition outside into the larger world. I also am very concerned in terms of my activism. You know, I thought, okay, where is my activism centered? You know, my activism is centered, at least at this moment right now, around the curriculum. And so part of that for me is, how do I safeguard Africana Studies? How do I protect it from the forces that would delight in its perish? How can I guarantee that every student, especially in criminology, which is the largest major in our college, how can I ensure that at least all of those students take at least one course on the Black experience? How do I help to share with my millennial students, many of them who have biracial, multicultural backgrounds, the ways in which their roots and identity are not in opposition to their African heritage and are linked to the richness of our diaspora? And how do I help to nurture and to produce a new generation of young scholars to develop a liberatory politics that transforms our community? So those are some of the things that at least I attempt to do, like on a weekly basis. In terms of my work, I'll try to keep this very short. In terms of thinking about history, I wrote an essay with one of my colleagues called Historiography Against History, the Propaganda of History and the Struggle for the Hearts and Minds of Black Folk. This was published in Socialism and Democracy. And so I just wanted to mention that there is a section in there that examines the trail blazed by the first Black women historians. And I was thinking about some of the comments that Dr. Perkins made yesterday. Clearly, there's always been the prevailing race and gender and class stereotypes. And clearly, when we talk about a profession like history, that it's always been overwhelmingly white and male. I also wrote about the way in which Black women were thought of early on in the profession, and the fact that they were considered incapable of becoming good historians because it was said that they could not be objective. And that as these race women set out to set the record straight about their lives, they were judged as partisan and subjective and intuitive. And of course, these were considered to be qualities that were not a part of writing real history. In terms of this conference, a lot of my work has dealt with representation and imagery around African American women, particularly the historical implications of going back and looking at controlling images. One of my latest pieces was Stories Worth Telling: How Kerry Washington Balances Brains, Beauty, and Power in Hollywood. And it's less a work about Kerry Washington in Scandal than a work that looks at Washington as her activist work. So in this particular anthology, it was about interrogating representations of women's intellect in film and television. And precisely, I look at how Washington was able to leverage a personal commitment to issues that matter for her in terms of her helping to support the president during the elections of 2008 and in 2012. And so more so looking at that specifically, and how her politics influences the roles that she has later taken on, particularly her role in Scandal. And then I'm just going to finish out really quickly one of my last parts. I just wanted to say that also one of the things that I look at is how Black women clearly were always subjected to complicated cultural myths that have political implications for us. And so my latest work is called Sapphires Gone Wild: The Politics of Black Women's Respectability in the Age of the Mean Girl. And in that particular work, I'm examining the sapphire. And you know sapphire, right? Sapphire, the domineering, aggressive, emasculating female. And so in this particular piece, I'm looking at racialized understandings of the word evil, because this will be part of an anthology on what's considered to be evil women. And I argue that evil is racialized, and it also has, as we know, historical and cultural underpinnings. So I'm looking at how the behavior of Black women in reality television, but particularly two particular case studies with Omarosa Manigault and Kenya Moore, abandoned and undermined the historical mission and also the cultural aesthetics that are part of African American womanhood. And so I just kind of end in just by saying that African American women historically would have spurned the idea and spent their whole lives defending their name. So they never would have gone out in public, literally or figuratively, showing their asses. That's not something that they would have done. So the question is, how is it that we have college-educated, professional Black women who have moved to blatantly disrespect other sisters, be it through verbal trashing, be it through in-your-face kinds of antics, be it through physical violence, all for profit and celebrity? So these are some of the questions that I'm dealing with in my ongoing work. So with that, peace out.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome, and thank you so much for the welcome that you have extended to me and to all of us in this wonderful space. My name is Malaika Mutere. I'm a lecturer in Black popular music, which I've enjoyed the great privilege of teaching through the African American Studies Department here at UCI. Before I began, then Director Jared Sexton asked if I could teach the subject matter from my oral aesthetic perspective, which I developed in the African American Studies PhD program at Temple University out of my experience and understanding of African oral traditions and my MA background in ethnomusicology. While I'm not teaching this spring quarter, I am focused on editing my book, In Search of an Agent, entitled Bantu Waltz, which is the recipient of the Bharti Kirchner Other Voices Writing Award, with the writing group support of Dr. Frank Wilderson, who we heard from over lunch, and Alberto Gugliaba, both of UCI. So when Dr. Willoughby Herard invited me to speak at this amazing gathering, I was initially hesitant because of the way my creative writing project consumes me by its very sort of personal nature and pulls me out of being otherwise immersed in the preoccupations of academic intellectual scholarship. So I thought I'd speak today from that informal space of my own oral history and reflections with the license that has been so eloquently granted by our keynote poet, Natalia Malabazzi, our story musicologist, Victoria Burnett, and our wonderful host, Dr. Willoughby Herard, who has convened us through call response, one of the oral aesthetic motifs that I teach from that is fundamental to our communication flows in the African oral life world, which allow us culturally centered access in terms by which to talk about our individual and collective journeys. My own journey began with a call that came through Michael Jackson when I was a high schooler in Kenya. Okay, I feel like this is the space where Spirit has spoken to me, time to share this. This is what I write about in Bantu Waltz. So just to talk briefly about it without actually spoiling the story, high school for me was a boarding high school. I mean, I guess you can imagine Hogwarts, those of you who are Harry Potter fans, I'm not sure. But it was a very colonial affair when I was going through high school. You know, uniforms, compulsory chapel on Sunday, no African braids in our hair, steak and kidney pie with rhubarb crumbled dinners, Shakespeare on our curriculum, no African authors. So by the end of each week, you know, we needed to carve out some space to remember who we were as Africans in that, you know, it used to be called the European Girls' High School. By the time I got in there, it was called the Kenya Girls' High School, but nothing else had changed about it. So on Saturday evenings, for like 2 to 3 glorious hours in the common rooms of our dormitories, we'd spin records from Motown, Stax, Atlantic, and dance our way into our developing womanhood. I mean, you know, I'm 12 years old through about 18 years old, probably in high school. You know, before Sunday morning came around and we'd have to be back in our uniform attending chapel services. So artists like the Jacksons, for me, played a diplomatic role in that context. And when young Michael sang, "You and I must make a pact, we must bring salvation back. Where there is love, I'll be there." You know? I thought, oh my God, that's a call. If ever there was a call, that, in the history of calls, that is a call. So, you know, it's probably the reason that I'm here. You know, just trying to figure out, what does salvation look like? You know, what did he mean by that call? You know, you put those, and you think about how young he was, I mean, you know, prepubescent himself, carrying that heavy message into the world. In an oral life world context, you don't just put those words out there to leave them hanging, you know. So there has to be a response of some kind. And so I heard those words and I said, how do I respond? What does salvation look like? I mean, for some people, it looks like Jesus Christ. Some others, it might look like Muhammad. In African oral tradition, Bantu culture specifically, which is my linguistic group, we have you've heard it before, Ubuntu. I am because we are. We are each other's salvation. And so that's, okay. So perhaps we should just fly through the slides. So, you know, when I'm teaching my class, I start out by showing this particular slide of David Oyewolo, who is responding to questions about being the subject of Oscar snub outrage regarding his role in Selma. And he says, we as Black people have been celebrated more for when we're being subservient, when we're not being leaders or kings, or being in the center of our own narrative, driving it forward. None of us would disagree with him. And this slide on the left-hand side, I just picked it up off the, I just kind of Googled, I was doing my research on it, and somebody had put up this slide that basically says, conquerors gave you Oscar to be a slave, ancestors gave you Ptah to be a goddess. When I saw that, I just thought to myself, how is it that ancestors speak to me? Why is it that I heard that call? David Oyelowo talking in a certain sort of time and space about what Oscar means to us in terms of our narrative and driving it forward. I'm in agreement with him, but at the same time, coming from an ethnomusicology background, I'm saying we are still driving our narrative forward through oral traditions. We just need to understand what those oral tradition mechanisms are, what that narrative is, whether on an individual basis or a collective sort of group basis. And so, how do the ancestors speak to me? Ptah, Lupita, you see how her name, she's a homegirl from Kenya, okay? Her name is so similar to Ptah, the god who is depicted on the left-hand side of the screen, who is actually an African god in charge of artists and craftsmen, picture makers. You can see the similarity between that African god, who is an ancient depiction of African picture makers, versus Oscar. One of them is holding a sword. The other one is holding symbols of his godhood. And we've got to see these symbols for what they are. They are colonized versions, and just to think how deep it is when that particular symbol, a colonized version of a God that belongs to us, that is our God, is used to keep us from the silver screen telling our stories. I think that is really profound, and we really need to start recognizing these things. I think if we can move forward, I'll try to go faster. These are sort of the symbols that Ptah is holding on the left-hand side. The Waz, the Jed, which stands for the backbone, the Ankh, which is the key of life. The circle on the top represents the feminine, the crucifix on the bottom, the divine masculine, the balance. It is through that union that life comes into the world. Okay, so that's basically what it is. In other words, and I just have prints. So Proverbs from the Luxor temple of Amun Montu Khonsu. Amun, does anybody ever tell you in life that when you say your prayers and you say amen at the end of the prayer, you are invoking an African god? His name is Amun. The prefix of my last name, Mut-e-re. Mut was his divine feminine counterpart. Re is light, mother. Mut stands for mother. And so, my oral tradition demands for me to look at that name and sort of occupy the space that has been given to me through that name. Every time I say Mutere, I have to be very conscious of what that means and what that, potential significance is. And so some of the proverbs that come out of the temples that they, are still relevant to the industries that sort of contain and colonize us today. So you look at the entertainment industry, and these are proverbs. These are all from our oral histories. Images are nearer reality than cold definitions. Men need images. Lacking them, they invent idols. Better than to found the images on realities that lead to the true seeker to the source. Politics. Organization is impossible unless those who know the laws of harmony lay the foundation. When the governing class isn't chosen for quality, it's chosen for material wealth. This always means decadence, the lowest stage a society can reach. I'll let you decide how that applies to today's political scene. Okay, the knowledge industry. If the master teaches what is in error, the disciple's submission is slavery. If he teaches truth, this submission is ennoblement. Have we been taught truth, or have we been taught in error? So these are the questions and this is all our oral tradition that is available to us, but we need to claim it. And so I try to claim it in these different ways. The best and shortest road toward knowledge of truth is nature. So there's a Bantu Congo proverb that says, what you think belongs to you, but what you say belongs to the community. Again, if you keep those thoughts to yourself, they're your thoughts. But once you speak them, once they become oral utterances, then they belong to the community. That is the call. The community will respond as it will to what energy, what seeds you have planted out there with your words that are spoken. So these are the sort of 7 oral aesthetic motifs that I teach from. I can't go through each one just because of time considerations. But like I said, Ubuntu is the sort of overarching philosophical motif that says, I am because we are. If you want to see more detailed discussion about those motifs, you can go to my website, malaikamutere.com. Joe Holloway, why I focus on Bantu culture. He says, once the Bantu reached America, they were able to retain much of their cultural identity. He's talking about 40% of the enslaved Africans that came from Africa to the Americas. And basically, those from the Bantu linguistic group were placed in the fields. And so they were able to retain the African traditions that they came with a lot easier than those who were placed in the house because they had to assimilate. And, you know, somehow it just worked out that the Bantu were the ones who tended to be placed in the fields. And so that which you recognize as African-American culture is largely Bantu. So these are the connections, the kind of connections that I'm able to make. And so, you know, he talks about how this culture has basically translated into the musical forms and other cultural forms. So again, you know, just in terms of its relationship to nature, the best and shortest road toward knowledge of truth is nature. This is another proverb that is on the same temple that the other proverbs that I quoted from. I have a picture here of the, you know, it's the Nile River sort of superimposed over Manu Dibango, who's a famous Cameroonian musician. Basically, just to emphasize the fact that the cradle of civilization is right about where his heart is, okay? That is where humankind originated from. That is where archaeology tells us the oldest remains of humanity or humankind have been found. This is the cradle of civilization. This is, you know, and there would be no Egypt, ancient Egypt, all the wisdom, all the sacred wisdom we've been talking about without the Nile River. So there would be no Nile River without this particular lake. So I just wanted to put that out there because everything in life is on a journey. When we speak, we're planting seeds. It's like this Nile River started as a seed with that lake and then rolled upwards, and these civilizations were able to flourish. Sacred wisdom was, you know, that was nature-based, was able to be developed. And so we have to start thinking organically in that way in terms of, okay, sorry, I have to speed it along here. So, you know, I'm just saying that, you know, once we know how to make those organic connections, I think we're in a healthier state of mind as a community. When we're sort of cut off from those terms of existence, there are health implications, community health implications. And I've done a couple of years of work with the UCLA School of Nursing, just understanding with the homeless youth, their stories are so similar to our stories as disenfranchised people. And so, you know, some of my research findings have been published. I'm sorry I can't go into detail. I've got to sort of move this along here. But the key to all problems is the problem of consciousness. And so I have this slide here just featuring Janelle Monáe, I guess as a nod to the Black Lives Matter movement. But even in her statement where she says the song is a vessel, speaking about how you're talking about, it carries the unbearable anguish of millions. We recorded it to channel the pain, fear, trauma caused by the ongoing slaughter of our brothers and sisters. We recorded it to challenge the indifference, disregard, and negligence for all those who remain quiet about this issue. Silence is our enemy. Sound is our weapon. They say a question lives forever until it gets the answer it deserves. Won't you say their names? Names are nomo. It's part of our oral tradition. Understand the significance of all that. And, you know, this is, and so just kind of in a nod to my original point about, you know, the slave masters gave you Oscar to be a slave and ancestors gave you to be a goddess, you know, we have this project by Beyonce, Queen Bee. Oshun, the goddess, African goddess of music, dance, beauty, love, healing, prosperity, fertility, order, always depicted in the color yellow. There she is in her African fabric, you know, just being, centering Black womanhood in terms of her message and, you know, where she is taking that narrative that is our narrative, our collective narrative, just taking it to that next level. And so, okay, thank you. And with that, thank you, I appreciate it.
So I'll be the last to thank Tiffany and everyone, everyone here, with graduate students, faculty, everyone who's come for what has been for me, who's not a political scientist, really invigorating, stimulating, and incredibly nurturing. So thank you, all of you, for all of your contributions and participation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my work and who I am. So I prepared remarks because I'm always better not just talking on and on. So my research is focused primarily on representations of Black women. My interest began when I was an undergraduate and a theater major, in part because of the absolute dearth of roles for Black women outside of a few maids and other stereotyped characters. In my youth, I vowed to write better roles for Black women, but I was not very skilled as a playwright and thought maybe it was not the way for me to make my living. My background in both history and political theory, which actually technically was my undergraduate major, led me to address the issue from theoretical and historical perspectives. Along the way, I've taken a few diversions, and I'll mention those a little bit later in the presentation. So thematically, my research began focused on images of Black women in popular culture. As other theorists have also stated, the effect of negative stereotyped images of Black women in culture has more than a simply cosmetic effect. What Patricia Hill Collins and someone else earlier mentioned calls controlling images. Stereotyped caricatures have been deployed in culture, both high culture and low culture. So I'm talking everything from theater to vaudeville stages and everything in between, since the 19th century, to shore up white supremacy by denigrating Black people in general. The material effects of these images is that they pervade the consciousness of people of all races and dictate or try to dictate the possibilities, how we are seen, and why we should not be taken seriously. In part, then, my argument in the dissertation in my first book, which was titled Mammies No More, The Changing Image of Black Women on Stage and Screen, was for visibility and broad visibility. My early work looked at both white supremacist constructions of Black women and Black women's resistive creations. So I was very interested in how Black women consciously created images that directly contrasted the racist ones that existed in culture. My second research focus, and the focus of my second book, was on theater specifically, because I saw in theater at the time the potential for change. Well, certainly greater potential for change than that of Hollywood, because Hollywood is notoriously slow as molasses when it comes to making any kind of change. I'm sorry. So in spite of the challenges that we still have in theatrical representation, every once in a while, they're going to trot out some of those plays, and you're like, really? You're not really going to? Okay. What I saw then was the effect of what I consider, in a way, one of the most flexible of the arts, because theatrical production could be culturally specific and still break even. And because even large regional theaters could put on a Black show in February for Black History Month. They only do one a year, but they do it in February, and not hurt their income. So in other words, they had the ability to financially say, okay, we'll sort of throw you a bone. Usually it was an August Wilson play, but that's okay, because, you know, So less reliant on a broad audience for hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, theater during the late 1990s and early 2000s was a place where black women's talent was being nurtured. More specifically, it had a profoundly feminist bent to it. The last chapter of my second book is Black Feminism and Contemporary Drama. The last chapter of that book is called A Black Feminist Aesthetic. And in it, I outline the ways in which the playwrights, the 7, I believe, playwrights that I examine throughout the book, articulate an inherently intersectional black feminism. I was also particularly directed this way because of the ways in which the field of theater, and more specifically feminist theater studies, refused to engage with intersectionality or with feminism outside of a restrictive notion of what it meant to do feminist theater. If it wasn't Brechtian, it wasn't feminist theater. The issues that black women playwrights engaged, domestic violence, environmental racism, representational history, activism, sex, sexuality, were emphatically feminist in nature, even if that feminism went unrecognized by white feminists. I also used my black feminist analysis just after, or right around the same time that I was writing that book, to talk about race and theater in another context, in a chapter in an anthology called Colorblind Shakespeare, which is a really good anthology, where I engaged with the history of representation of black men and the ways in which so-called colorblind casting remains often deeply connected to the generations-old representations of blackness with which people remain comfortable. And in that, I talk about 2 productions, one in London and one in Chicago, of Shakespeare plays where they do this colorblind casting. In the Chicago example, particularly, they were doing Richard III. Richard III, his 2 henchmen were black, and everyone else in the cast was white. I was profoundly uncomfortable for 2.5 hours while I watched that show. A diversion. Just before I got tenure, because it was a real possibility despite having already written 1 book and a few articles and working on another book that I might not get tenure, I diverged and decided to get another degree in acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine. Because you should always have a backup plan. I am now also a licensed acupuncturist in my spare time, which I have enough. I had planned to leave the academy and do my healing work, at which I've been told by numerous patients that I am quite good. But the chair who supported my tenure case and got me through tenure and promotion sucked me back into the academy. So here I am. So I'm still engaged in this pursuit, looking at these images and representations, although my current focus has changed. The book project I began last spring, which I expect to finish next year, thank you, sabbatical, also takes a historic view of the representation of black women, but this time on the small screen. I remain interested in the ways in which proliferation of particular images inhibits or creates possibilities, material effects for black women. Like the movement towards a more inclusive theater, there is, at the current moment, a movement towards more inclusive television, even for the most part if we only see that on Thursday night on ABC. So I'm interested in this current moment because, like theater, the small screen has a kind of flexibility that film does not yet have or is not yet willing to take. I'm arguing that the expansion of television, first outside of network television and then outside of network and subscription television, has created an environment, along with changes in behavior, thank you binge watchers, in which it is easier to take risks on projects that might otherwise never see the light of day, let alone be produced, filmed, and broadcast. So while much of this is focused in a few places, like Shonda Rhimes' Thursday Night Dynasty, and subscription and streaming services from YouTube and Netflix, are also primary locations where these kinds of transformed representations exist. I anxiously awaiting Issa Rae's HBO series, which is currently in production. The other prong to this current project is the ways in which black women have or have not been able to wield some degree of power in Hollywood, at least in the television industry, increasingly since the 1990s. The project goes back to the 1950s and starts with the Beulah Show. It sort of works its way through. Here, and this happens a little later in the book, my argument is that it was not only more black programming on television, for as we know, just because we are represented doesn't mean those representations change anything about how we're perceived, but specifically that black women running shows, directing and producing, allowed different kinds of images to emerge. If you think back to the 1990s and Different World and Living Single and how fun those were, then you sort of see where I'm going with those. These kind of images move away from the kinds of respectability politics that predominated in earlier decades and through the 1980s, when we were, after all, still trying to fight that welfare queen image that Reagan resurrected, and gave us characters that were more than just two-dimensional, whether those two-dimensional were positive two-dimensional. We all love Claire Huxtable, but let's be frank, she was just kind of a two-dimensional character, or the negative, mammy two-dimensional kinds of stereotypes. So just after I was tenured, there was that acupuncture school thing, I also diverged off from one of my core interests to one that was tangentially related but not obviously related. And that was my interest in the genome and the Human Genome Project, and the services that sprung up very quickly to tell us what our African ancestry was. And despite our long history of tension with medical experimentation without our consent, people willingly swabbed their cheeks and sent in a sample so they could find out where their African ancestors came from, in part because we can look back through census and we get to a point where we get lost and we can't go back any further. So I'm still working on a piece, although it's almost finished, on the interesting ways in which this science that in one way offers us a way back through the Middle Passage simultaneously was used, as if you've read Dorothy Roberts' work, to reinvigorate this biological notion of race, that we could somehow tell what race was through biology. So on the surface, the focus changed, but underneath it, I'm still looking at what is the representation of blackness, whether that's a scientific representation or a visual representation. I have, since receiving my PhD in drama 20 years ago now, have always worked in interdisciplinary units. My first was in Africana Studies, and my second was in Women and Gender Studies, which is where I am now. And after 20 years, I call myself, when someone asks what discipline I'm in, I tell them I am undisciplined. So if I leave you with one thing today, it is that I encourage you to be undisciplined. Draw from what you need, and work across and away from the boundaries that academe tries to enforce on us. Be undisciplined. It's good for you. It's good for you.
If I may, because I didn't say anything, but I want to thank you as well, Tiffany, for inviting us, for inviting me, and for having such a wonderful program. Today has been very emotional for me, and so for those of you who know me, know I've been dealing with leaving academia for at least 2 years, thinking about considering trying to leave. I'm trying to work on my plan B, so I want to be a mental health counselor, so I'm trying to start that and go back to school for that. But I've also have great mentors and friends in this room, that have been more than supportive, and they're trying to keep me in academia. We love you. And trying to keep me here, but this whole experience has just been very embracing, and I struggled because I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. Because I don't really consider myself a feminist scholar, so I was like, okay, what am I going to talk about? But it's been really good, and all of you have been really receptive and embracing, and this whole experience, just hearing about it, and all the support and love from other sisters, and all of you telling your story and everything has been really good. So I am up for tenure this year. So I am still going through that process and trying to figure it out. And as you, I'm trying to think about what I'm gonna do if it don't work, right? But I'm really appreciative to be here, and I thank you for inviting me.